All right, everyone, we are live. Today we have an amazing investor. I was so excited to cross paths with Ashley. Ashley Nowicki. She's an associate at it's Quona Capital, right? That's how you pronounce
Quona.
Quona. Yep.
Yep.
And just a little bit of background on them. They are a leading fintech firm focused on emerging markets. Ashley is a serial entrepreneur, has been involved with a number of startups, formerly Facebook, First Round Capital, Leap Motion, among other stealth projects that I'll let her talk about if she wants to venture into that space. But Ashley, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Hi, everyone. Hope everybody's staying safe. It's a crazy time in the world.
Yes, this crazy time, and we'll dive into it, seeing what you're seeing, especially fintech and emerging markets. This is a time. But diving in and giving the audience a little bit more context, can you share a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Yeah. So I actually started on the operating side, joining the recruiting side of things probably about 8 to 10 years ago at this point. Recruited first on the marketing and communication side of things, mostly advertising and design. That then moved me over to doing recruiting for Apple, which got me closer to product. I got really excited about building products and contributing to that process. So then jumped over to be the first employee building. Essentially what it was an enterprise hiring community, invite only in the early stages to build a reputation of the community itself. And then companies like Nike, Airbnb, Apple, etc., would hire members of our community directly for different initiatives and projects. Then that actually got me into helping different companies scale once they closed different rounds of funding. So started doing a lot of executive recruiting, helping build executive teams, doing executive coaching for existing teams, and then also creating plans for expansion. Typically Series B, Series C, somewhere between 10 and 50 million is what these companies were closing. And then obviously helping them create plans, not only for hypergrowth, but putting key hires into verticals to lead those teams as we were scaling. That led me to Leap Motion. We took Leap Motion through an acquisition. It was a crazy ride. I'm so grateful for it. And then that took me over to First Round. So I was a First Round expert in residence for almost 2 years. I helped high priority companies and founders across the portfolio solve different people operations challenges, and then decided that instead of giving people money to continuously build products for other people, I wanted to step onto the venture side and see what it was like to give people capital to build products that they believe in for themselves, versus constantly giving them a salary to build products for other people. So it's been a crazy ride. Quona is based in DC. We've got offices in India as well. Before COVID, we were a pretty remote team. Obviously, with COVID, we have to be. And we closed our second fund at 203 million a little bit earlier this year. So I've been lucky to come in not just during COVID, but also shortly after that closed, and really get to ride the roller coaster that is and has been created by the team that I get to work with, which I'm grateful for. And we're continuing to build on that momentum. The cool thing about being in fintech during COVID is you can't exchange cash. So it's forcing people to move into digital payments faster than we could have ever predicted, which is pretty exciting.
And if you could share a little bit more about, I know you shared a little bit about your background, but how much do you all invest? Like what types of startups do you look for? I know it's emerging markets. I know it's fintech, and with a $200 million fund, just giving other founders out there looking for you guys. What are you looking for?
Yeah, totally. So we do a little bit later stage. Our average check sizes are 10 to 15 million-ish. Obviously that's flexible for the right founders or the right company, but I would say on average, that's what we're looking at. About 75% of our investments are in India, Brazil, and what am I missing? India, Brazil, Indonesia, and Mexico are our major countries right now. I believe, I don't think I'm missing any, but yeah, primarily Africa Latin America, and Southeast Asia are our priority targets. So the reason why we target these places is because they have infrastructure that we can tap into, but also need a lot of support as far as bringing people into the digital space, or if you're doing like a lot of merchant support. It's a really interesting time as well as we deal with supply chain shortages, but then also other things that are hitting emerging markets faster and more turbulently than we could have expected. And then on top of that, we have things happening like the locust infestation that's moving through Africa right now. So you're not just dealing with the turbulence of COVID and the economic crisis, but you're also dealing with plagues of other kinds that are going to make the situation in places like Africa even more strained.
I have to be honest. When I first saw the locust plagues, I thought it was an April Fool's joke around like biblical times. This is, and I was like, no, you can't make this up.
With Easter coming and everything, right? Yeah.
That's right. Very intense times. Can you share a little bit more since you were first round capital, and I know you joined first round after the leap motion and the transition. Can you talk a little bit more about the role you had at first round and how it was different than the role you have now for those that don't know the difference between platform and investment team?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I will say the fun thing about what I'm doing right now is I get to blur the lines a little bit. But with that, so being an operating partner or being in an operator role, essentially what you're there to do is be a tool that the partners can deploy to assist founders in specific ways. So that might be helping them create plans to scale from 50 to 500 people in the next 6 to 9 months, but then also starting to put actions into place to help support that growth. That could be hiring their first CTO if neither of the co-founders are technical, to be able to get to the next phase of the company or the product. It's a wide range. It could be opening offices in places like Shanghai or Europe if they've never done it before. What do they need to be working through internationally for expansion? But that being said, what it taught me was how to find empathy and common ground with founders very quickly. And I found that top 3 responses for every founder, things that keep them up at night, hiring the right people and getting that talent across the line is always in the top 3. So I basically came in it from an angle of, if I can solve that problem for founders, that puts me one step ahead of every other VC who's going to be trying to close those deals. Because I'm not only going to identify the weaknesses in their org chart, I'm going to make personal recommendations from people that I've previously recruited into significant roles in other organizations and help get them across the line for that company. So I saw that as a very clear value add that I could bring, because I knew I wasn't going to go back to business school. I knew I didn't have a master's. So it was basically my street smarts master. Yep. Because I knew I needed some edge that other people didn't have. And so it was being able to build structurally sound teams, solid executive leadership teams, coaching them in areas that they were weak, but then also making key hires for their org as they scale. First round was all seed stage. So, you're dealing with a much smaller, more intimate team, where I would argue the hires matter even more, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's so small and you're really proving everything. Quona, on the other hand, is a little bit later stage, because we're taking the risk of emerging markets, we're probably not also going to take the risk on a seed stage company, right? So that's a different approach than what something like a first round may consider.
No, that's great. You're doubling down on your superpower, which you talk about. That is like figuring out how do you bring the best of yourself, right? Your unique competitive advantage. So.
Well, I think it also really, when you're honest with yourself about what your own personal value add is, it makes it easier to navigate through the landscape of private equity or VC a little bit easier of a process, because it's such a vast place and you don't necessarily always know when you are transitioning onto the investing side. I didn't honestly know where I would maybe be a good fit on an investment team. So it took a lot of exploration. It took a lot of conversations with different teams. It took a lot of self-reflection of saying, what size of team makes sense for me? Because I knew that I didn't want to work at a firm that was bigger than first round. one of my intentions into moving on to the investment side was that I wanted to work very closely with a dedicated partner. Like I didn't just want to be a floating investment team member. And I was very specific about the type of size. And I knew I wanted to work on social impact in some way, shape, or form. If the firm wasn't dedicated to that vertical, I needed to make sure that they had a branch within that did. For instance, like Princeville was a good example, where Princeville in general isn't necessarily, an environmental VC, which is what I did with Rebel One, but they launched Princeville Climate, which is their dedicated environmental branch of the firm, right? So that was important to me, is that there was at least a component of it if it couldn't be dedicated to it. And what I found is that took me down a very different route than, the Excel, Andreessen first round kind of trajectory.
That's great. How big is your investment team now?
I think we're 12.
Okay.
Ish, about 12.
12, so 200 million, 12. How big was first rounds?
Oof. I don't know. I can't answer that honestly.
It was that big.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not honestly sure.
That's it. Well, it's good. It gives a little bit of insight to and I love. I mean, that's a whole different conversation around like incentive structure. I think first round has a particular structure for partners coming in and incentivizes them to stay
right
periods of time.
Well, and to your point earlier, I mean, I would argue that first round has built one of the most successful venture capital platforms in the world. And so I think when you are lucky enough to see companies and people doing things very well, you try to take those lessons and apply them to other spaces. And does first round's platform initiative make sense for every VC? No, frankly, it doesn't. But are there certain things that you learn about building products or communities or ecosystems along the way, VC related or not, that become valuable when you're trying to make recommendations to partners about innovations and deal flow? Where can we be getting access to deals in ways that we're not currently? I do think having a fresh perspective of being new to a firm allows you to make those recommendations once you feel settled and comfortable and understand where a lot of the deal flow comes from. But one of the things that I really took away from this fellowship when I did it with you guys was the importance of those relationships in getting access to deals and co-investing in deals. And so, I think Rob Hayes always used to say at first round, I think he always used to say that he's just a glorified recruiter, right? And there is something to be said about that. And which is why I think if you are an operator or if you have experience in people operations and human resources and recruiting, transitioning into the VC side can actually be a really interesting career pivot.
Absolutely. Can you share a little bit more before we keep moving to, I mean, that's a pretty bold statement that, it's that first round capital is one of the, best platforms in the world that you've seen. What are the elements that you saw that made it, world, best in class?
Yeah, I mean, obviously being sensitive to confidentiality, I will say that they have an ability to connect people in a way that I find to be quite impressive. Those connections take place and are facilitated in a lot of different ways: online, offline, in person, on the phone, video. Now with COVID, that's a new reality as well. But the way that they mentor, the way that they foster relationship building is incredibly impressive, especially when you realize how big their portfolio really is, as far as how many investments they have, and the loyalty that they build between founders. Is some of the most impressive initiatives that I've seen. So, I was a very, very small part of that, but I feel grateful that I was able to see and work with some of these folks who had put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to make First Round's platform run the way that it has, and frankly, built the reputation that they have for providing guidance to founders. I think so many times you see VCs want to tell founders what they should and should not do, and First Round says, actually, no. We're going to have founders talk to founders and talk about what they felt, what they experienced, what they learned with each other, and just be there to facilitate versus shove a bunch of things down people's throats that may or may not be relevant for them depending on what's going on. I mean, consumer businesses are getting hammered right now.
Yep.
I think it was, I can't remember the gentleman's name. One of the guys over at Andreessen released a graph that showed that bread machines were the second fastest growing e-commerce product on the market right now. So I think we're just in a time where everything is so up and down and left and right that the one thing we do know is that a lot of consumer companies are getting hit pretty hard given the cut in spending just in the month of March alone.
Yeah, yeah, it is pretty intense now. I want to shift back to your firm, and you mentioned you focus on emerging markets. What are some of the things you do? Like I've always found, right, that and we feel that in the U.S. If you're in an ecosystem, you check in on the founder, you meet them in person. Now we can't do that to it, but at least we have cultural context and we understand the environment in which it works. If you're investing in a company in South Africa or Nigeria or Tanzania, Kenya, it's totally different contexts if you've never lived there. What do you all do to find deals differently and also vet them?
Yeah, so that's one of the things I love about Quona. We actually have all four of our partners have lived and worked in the markets that we service. So we do have a partner based in South Africa. We have one based in India. And then we have one who splits his time between Mexico City and Sao Paulo, and then in Washington and DC as well. The partner that I report to is primarily based out of DC right now. But that's the beauty of it, because our partners have lived and breathed and worked in these locations, in these geographies locally. They already come with a lot of relationships. The deal team in the broader sense also lives and breathes and works in these markets as well. And then DC is obviously just there to help connect the dots. But I will say that perspective is invaluable. And it's one of the things that I think Quona has the opportunity to capitalize on during COVID is being a thought leader, not just in financial technology or in emerging markets, but in ways that they have folks physically on the ground. Because I work on our COVID task force internally at Quona, which is a whole nother conversation because of how fast things are moving. But without localized eyes and ears on the ground, we wouldn't be as effective in helping our founders create risk mitigation plans because the information that you're seeing hit some of the news sources or embassies is days behind compared to when the folks that live there receives that information.
Absolutely. So you have 12 people, a series of them in DC, and then you have people in each of these markets, like living there. Okay.
Yep.
Great. That's amazing. Well, while we're on the topic, let's dive in. What are you seeing from COVID uniquely impacting these startups? And if you want to go into uniquely fintech startups, I know you mentioned the push toward digital in a more rapid fashion. So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I think are really interesting that are happening. The first is obviously government response has varied significantly depending on what region we're talking about. And I think what I'm seeing very clearly is how much that is impacting things. But on the flip side, the type of pressure that's putting on the market to respond. So depending on what part of the world you're talking about, you're seeing the need for not just financial inclusion, but also financial innovation in very different ways. So some of the things that I think are important to keep in mind are that specifically in Africa, obviously they are pushing towards, as I mentioned, this removal of cash payments in general. So that's doing two things. That's pushing a lot of people online. That's opening up a lot of opportunities for new people who focus on point of sale to come in. But what it's also doing is allowing folks to collect data on what people are spending money on for the first time. Because when you're doing it with cash, there's no trail. So what you're seeing now are some of these governments come to the companies within Quona's portfolio and say, we actually need information. We need guidance from you on where the shortages are, on what kinds of materials and what part of the country, because you've got access to analytics that we don't, which is really interesting because that's not what they were ever in the business of, right? But in an emergency situation, that becomes really important. Another one of the things that we're seeing are new features or services be kicked up and offered and go live very quickly as a result of strain from COVID. So for instance, one of our companies has developed a digital food stamp program where essentially they're the middle person connecting the dots between government aid and the local merchants that are giving those, let's call them relief packages to each family that comes with a voucher. So there's a lot of different things that we're seeing take place, but the one consistency is people either going one of two ways. Either in times of crisis, they move towards large banks because that's where they feel safer, or they're doing the complete opposite and saying, we can't even rely on the fact that these banks are going to cut us those checks. Therefore, we need to be focusing on challenger banks versus like mainstream central banks. And that varies a lot by country and region too. And then, I think what I'm just seeing on the VC side in general, which I don't know how I feel about, I guess I feel neutral at this point, is people being very honest about companies they think will survive this and companies that they do not think will survive this. And I also think that they're being careful about which of their darlings they save. It's hard when you're in this position where you're absorbing a lot of this information, and you have to also make sure that the founders are set up to not pour that panic on their people. So you want to make sure that you're trying to do that emotional coaching along the way too, and you're relaying information in real time as it's relevant, specifically with small business relief as governments release it. But you don't want to cause unnecessary stress when the founders are already dealing with a lot.
Yep, and I think that speaks to your point of the role VCs play in this ecosystem, especially now, given we just heard that the small business loans are tapped out, 350 million, all gone, and that they may come out with more, but that's in time, maybe not, and then also, even before that, there's a series of the venture-backed companies, right, that don't even qualify, because yeah.
And then the other part that is even crazier is that anyone who's taken money from private equity, I mean, they consider those all to be part of the same ecosystem. So it's like to hit the under 500 employee threshold is nearly impossible, because they're going to take all of your companies and put that employee number together to come out with that final number. So that's another facet to it as well that's developing in real time.
Yeah, so the vortex of like the funding that's coming into the system is not hitting the embryonic stage, right? Like it's causing, it's just pulling out resources when resources are already starved. So turning back on you is what do you really see? I know we started to talk about this before the call, talking about the role VCs play in really helping stabilize the market. Can you share more on what, share what you can, but talk about like at least what people are at least doing, and the conversations that they're having to try to get this under control?
Yeah, so I would say this breaks down into 3 different categories. The first is, I need to be very careful about how I say this, but mostly because I don't want to present it the wrong way. Let's call it like political organization. Essentially, like the National Venture Capital Association wrote a letter to Congress requesting clarification around who qualified for small business loans and who didn't, by design, right? And I think that VCs are trying to use influence to clarify where they can, and to push in areas where they know they can, because they also recognize very clearly how large of a percentage our economy is built on small businesses. So it's in the VC's interest to keep things afloat. I think the second place that I'm seeing them organize is their own resources. So, again, in times of crisis, I think it's very telling how leaders rise to the challenge. And what I'm seeing is VCs start to organize, or have been organizing for the last 3 to 4 weeks, resources on the ground when it comes to medical supplies, moving that supplies around, in-kind donations, pushing scientific research forward, different grants, different endowments, different donations. So I think that people are trying to be really resourceful. I think they're also trying to, in some ways, compare things to things that shouldn't be compared, which I think is dangerous. A lot of folks try to compare this to 2008, if there's anything that it can be compared to, it's the 1930s. So I think any comparison to 2008 does us more harm than good right now. And I think that the VC community is echoing that in a lot of ways. And then the third area I would say I'm seeing it is being very aware of the fact that some companies that exist today will not be around in 9 months' time. But on the flip side of that coin, we are going to see some really exciting companies pop up that don't exist today. And there's so much optimism in the community about what that's going to look like and what those companies are going to be. And I think clear moments in history that are defined by significant shifts in human behavior don't happen often. But when they do, we can't necessarily predict what's going to come out of it. I just know that there's this underlying excitement to see what kind of innovation takes place across the board in the next, let's say, 9 to 24 months.
Yep. And I think you hit it on the head. I want to repeat what you said, because I think it's very profound. It's like there's very few times in our lifetime that there's a shift, a global shift, right? It usually happens in pockets, but a global shift in human behavior at a moment in time, it's unique. So it's, scary, but change is happening, for sure.
Yeah, it's also one of those things where it's, we never knew that we needed to have it until you showed us, right? It's the Apple moment. It's the iPhone in my pocket. I never knew I needed a computer in my pocket until I knew I couldn't live without it. And I do think COVID is going to show us the things that we always knew we needed, essentials that have gone because of the situation. But then on the flip side, it's going to show us that we needed things that we never needed to, like maybe we never knew we needed telemedicine, but then when you open that box, you see how many issues that actually solves for people, not just who don't have work flexibility because they don't have hourly flexibility with their schedule, but also for people who live in rural communities. One of the companies that I got to work with was a company that was doing telemedicine to help with the opioid addiction. It's a company called Boulder Care, and they're incredible. But they got ahead of that telemedicine curve, and they were using it to treat addiction. But you can see very clearly how that could be rolled out to treat and assist with COVID without them really even needing to build anything new.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to shift back to your work at your firm, and as a for-profit impact, related startup. And I know you shared an article. The article will be on the post, or is on the post. But it mentioned a company, SokaWatch, an e-commerce startup in Africa. And can you speak a little bit more about what's in the article and what you shared on really going the extra mile in emerging markets, and your partnership with other organizations to help grow those companies? So I won't take the story away. I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, I think, again, this is very much still in development. So I want to be careful about, how far I speak here. But I will say that this is an example of people rising to the challenge. And we are really proud of the founders, not just at SokaWatch, but frankly, I would say I could think of 4 or 5 other portfolio companies off the top of my head where we have founders who have really stepped up once COVID has taken a stronghold. And you could argue that in Africa, it hasn't even really taken its full grip yet. But with that comes the opportunity to support each other, especially when you've got people who work on the small business side, but then you've also got people that work on the lender side, right? So what that allows you to do is try to support people from both sides of that spectrum, because your small businesses are going to need money from lenders in order to stay afloat, right? And then at the same time, you're collecting analytics that the government doesn't have access to, that now need them in real time in an urgent situation, and they can't possibly build their own ecosystem to get them the information as fast as they need it. So it's a really interesting time. And I think that, we, with initiatives like SokaWatch, what we're trying to show is that a lot of innovation is really exciting, but if you are not able to unlock financial opportunity for people, even for people living on less than $3 a day, they can't gain access to education. They can't gain access to healthcare services. They can't, unless you start there, there's a lot of other things that people are already prevented from being able to do even before they get started. And so, when I looked at social impact investing, I never thought I would want to work or be interested in financial services, full disclosure.
Yeah.
But as I got into it, I mean, I really respect our partners, so that has a lot to do with it as well. But I think outside of that, you know, when I got into the trenches and I realized, wait, we're going to move around another $80 million so that, you know, a couple of kids can build a dating app, or we can try to get people access to $5 a day so they can buy rice for their family. Like, where do I want to spend my time and energy? And I think that payments in particular are going to be one of the things that are going to change as a result of COVID that will never come back to the way that it was. Which we could get into that. I've been like totally geeking out on trends that I think are going to shift. Like, I think esports are finally going to take off. I think stadiums are going to shutter. We're not really going to do that kind of thing anymore. I think it's going to be a lot of live events. I think VR and AR might finally have its moment. Again, not because the technology is better than it was before, but just because people are more isolated than they were before. And the projections that we're seeing for social distancing measures are extending into 2022. So this is not something that's going to, I mean, it's not going to be as significant as it is at this moment, but it's not going to necessarily go away for a significant period of time. And then, you know, outside of that, I think the other thing that we're going to see are like a significant increase in just more telemedicine presences. And with the payment platform, I think how people pay for treatment for COVID has become a really big issue in emerging markets. Mm-hmm. So it's forcing people to think through payment solutions that I think they would have otherwise delayed if they had the opportunity to, just given the infrastructure. But you do see companies like Visa and MasterCard really rising to the challenge too. So I think that that's the other trend that I've seen that's hopeful, is like even the giants are stepping in to try to really help people because they recognize the advantage that they have. But that also means that, you know, they have to keep the small businesses afloat too. So if anything, I think with COVID, the major silver lining with COVID in general is we do realize we're all one ecosystem. And when one starts failing, it's just a matter of time before the rest of us do too. And I do think it would have taken an event like this for VCs to work together as well as I've seen them work together lately, since it's just normally so competitive, you know, and the collaboration and camaraderie has been amazing within the VC community. But then also, luckily within DC, you know, we have exposure to, you know, folks who have relationships with the government as well. And it just feels like everybody's really trying to do the best they can with a lot of unknowns. But the one other trend that I didn't mention is that we know there's no path to financial recovery until there's a vaccine.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, without dealing with the health crisis first, everything else is delayed. And so I think that is something that people are being very open about too, which is why you see a lot of people who have significant wealth, like private family offices, things of that nature, trying to fuel the fire of getting a vaccine more so than maybe donating money elsewhere.
Yep. Great. And I wanted to shift it. I know you mentioned some of the verticals as well. Wanted to ask about you mentioned your background when we were first met and started working together. You know, climate was the focus, and can you share a little bit more about the finding purpose in an area where you didn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious. I can't see most of you because you don't have your videos on, which is totally cool. But you know, I'd be curious how many people already work in venture versus don't, or who already have investor roles versus who isn't there yet. Mostly because, you know, when I first got into, this is my takeaway would be this: be open to being surprised. I thought that I would always want to be an early stage investor. I thought that, you know, from all the fulfillment I found in my time with First Round, in all the fulfillment that I found working side by side with founders, so in their better moments and in their not so good moments, you know, but really having that alliance with them despite which version of themselves they were on any given day. And then I got into growth stage. And I was like, whoa, this is a whole different set of challenges. And like, this is a whole different kind of emotional management and coaching and leadership that's required. And then you go through an acquisition and you're like, whoa, M&A is like a whole nother thing, And so I guess what I tried to do was expose myself to as many different versions of it as I could, knowing that when one of them felt like a good fit, I would feel it. Like I couldn't necessarily anticipate what it would be. I just knew that I would feel it. And after I wrapped up the fellowship and I started thinking like, okay, I really want to try to make the transition into a full-time investment team now. And I started that process. I mean, I cast a pretty wide net. I think I wrote down a list of like 75 different firms, anything from like 2 partners to 10 partners, all over the world though. And decided like that's who I was going to target first. And as I got into conversations, like the ones that I was really excited about on paper, when I got into conversations, maybe I wasn't as excited, or vice versa. The ones that I thought were just kind of like, oh, I'll do it because it's an opportunity, ended up making a huge impression on me. And to the point about Quona, diversity in the partners was really important to me, which we reflect very, very organically at Quona. Getting closer to influencing, and this comes straight from social impact investing in the fellowship, is understanding that you can influence public behavior and public benefit through the private sector more effectively in some ways than you can if you join the public sector. Because like for a while I was like, maybe I should maybe I should like get involved in politics. But then I realized like I'm better served staying on the private, trying to support public initiatives or public outcomes versus stepping into government. Like those spots should be reserved for people that will be far more effective at those roles than I will be. I'm better working behind the scenes, trying to help people in different ways. But I think that it just taught me that you don't know shit. Go into it with an open mind. Most importantly, the thing that's going to draw you in the most probably is going to be the team. And you're not going to know who that team is going to be until you meet them. So, I thought that all the things that I thought I knew got thrown to the wind, especially once you move on to the investing side, because I think you're motivated by different things. And I think for me, selfishly, like I wanted a place where we were building all of the excitement about what we were doing versus them already being really well established reputation wise in the market. Like I like that upward push. And Quona was coming in with a $203 million close on their second fund. It was early, but it's not like they don't have a really, really strong reputation in the marketplace. And so it was like a perfect fit to momentum wise, on top of the partners and the team being what I was really looking for. And as you can imagine, we have investments, I think, in like over 20 countries. Platform can be pretty important when you're trying to support that many founders across that wide of a range, not just of locations, but of also focuses in their products and the parameters that they have to deal with, because obviously with financial services comes regulations, right? So like with consumers or consumer businesses, you may not have to worry about that. Whereas with financial technology, we always have to worry about that. And so the one, I guess, parallel, or I guess like thing that's strung along throughout the entire experience is I've always cared the most about surrounding myself with good people. And when I was a recruiter, that's all I cared about, was working with the best. And I have a very strict no asshole policy. That's always been the case.
That's a good policy. It's a good policy.
I have a
straight shooter policy. That's my policy.
You do. I know that from experience. And so, I think that you find these parts of yourself that you've been loyal to, and that guides you a lot too, and tells you a lot when you're in those experiences and you're having those conversations. And sometimes you take an opportunity, and even if it's, whether it's the one that you were the most excited about or not, hopefully you just go into it with an open mind and try to learn as much as you can. But I feel so grateful for being a part of a team that opened my eyes into what I would consider more impactful outcome when it comes to being in venture capital, because you're not just focused on inclusion. You're not just focused on emerging markets, and you're not just focused on diversity. you're focused on all of those things all at the same time. And at some point you don't actually have to separate them from each other. And that's an incredible thing, because I know when we were doing our fellowship, one of the things that came up was like, oh, but social impact investing, it's kind of like a luxury, right? And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be. It literally can just be a venture firm that does good in the world. And we don't have to have like a social impact branch, or like a, a fund of a fund that does a fund of a fund. It could go a lot of different directions, but it's like, no, you still can do a model that makes sense, supports people, encourages diversity, and also focuses on parts of the world that are still working through different sets of limitations and support structures. And then I find that it's way more fulfilling for me personally, but it's all comes down to everybody's individual preferences. But I will say that if you're stepping into it for the first time on the investing side, like, cast a wide net and pay very close attention to the people that you're going to be in the trenches with, because if COVID's taught me anything, it's not necessarily about controlling the outcomes. It's about who you're strategizing with. And I'm really proud of the way that Quona has handled COVID, given all the things that are out of our control.
Great. Can you share a little bit more about what helped you make that leap into, because many people here they have varying backgrounds. What helped you get to Quona Capital and prepare you for that journey, prepare you to make that shift?
Well, you know me. I mean, I sucked at financial modeling. Sorry, I'm probably not supposed to cuss or like say words like suck on this, but I am. And I apologize for like the massive liquor thing behind me. Yeah, look, financial modeling was the thing that I struggled with the most. I could evaluate founders. As a recruiter, I was already paying attention to which companies were building really interesting technologies in which sectors. If you're good at recruiting, you're naturally curious, you're researching, you want to know who's building the best at what and who's behind it. And so, especially if you're recruiting very, very sought after skill sets, you have to know how to get people to stand out and take your call versus someone else's. So I think, that was something that I was really used to, but the financial modeling part was something that I really struggled with. Most of the modeling and projections that I had done were hiring budgets, operations budgets. These are things that you have, hours or days to sit down and work through. And as everyone probably knows, when you're doing those real-time equations, I really struggled with that. So I spent a lot of time by myself, just doing fake math problems. I know that sounds so silly to say out loud, but it's true, because it was the part that I felt like I wasn't up to par on. And I didn't expect anybody to do that part for me, right? That was very much like a personal development thing that I needed to go through. And then, I just kind of hit the pavement. I think, you tap into the relationships that that you have, you lean into the mentorships that you've built. Luckily, because I had done some favors for some people in the venture community previously, they introduced me to folks. And with Quona, I probably talked to them for like a month and a half before everything was said and done. And even then, I was talking to a bunch of other companies about a bunch of other opportunities. And I think the hardest thing for me was to stay focused, because there's a lot of VC firms that are exploring a lot of different types of additions to their team. And so it's easy to get distracted by other roles that may be available at other VC firms. And so, it was like, do you want to be the head of talent? Do you want to do that? And you're like, oh, it's so shiny. And but no, that's not what I'm doing this all for, right? Like, this isn't why I reset my career. I reset my career because I want to be an investor, not because I want to continue to support people as an operator. And so I kind of even fought with myself a little bit about where I was spending my time and energy. So I think I casted a wide net. I had a lot of conversations. I leaned into the goodwill that I had built with others, and I didn't feel bad about it or have any shame around it. It was just like, hey, I scratched your back, and now this is the time where I actually need help, and I'm willing to ask for it. And then outside of that, just tried to stay positive. I mean, it's hard, especially now with COVID, it's even harder, but it's hard to find a good fit. And when you're a recruiter, you know that because you're 1,000 no's for every yes. Like that's just how you operate when you're building an elite team. But it's different when you're the candidate, right? Because you kind of take that for granted a little bit. And I think that that's why the best VCs know what it's like to be a founder, because they don't take it for granted, and they're able to find empathy with people in ways that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise if they hadn't been in their shoes. And so I think it was a humbling experience for me as well. You know, coming from a place like First Round, I think it's easy to get meetings because a lot of folks really respect First Round, as I obviously do. And so I think that opened more doors, but it didn't mean that they were the right doors just because they were open. And that's the part that can be hard to stay true to, is making sure that you're gutting for the outcome that you want. And one of the other things I think that the fellowship is good for is just the networking. I mean, VC isn't that big of a business, right? So it's like once you get in it, again, as long as you're not an asshole, you'll be all right. You just gotta stay active in the community. You got to stay active in relationship building. I mean, there's not a lot of VCs that are great that are introverts, you know, but at the same time, they could have other people on their team that are extroverts that balance them out really well, and then they crush it. So I think that one of the main things that I was very clear about when I transitioned onto the investment side was wanting to have someone to learn from, and someone to learn from that I really looked up to and respected. And I liked the way that they did things so that I could figure out how to do things similarly to the way that they do. And so you can't really hand that to someone, right? It's kind of trial by error. But I think, you know, for the people who are on this, I'd be curious where they found or where they've struggled the most, either in their transition or in their interview processes or in their evaluation processes for different types of firms, locations, focuses. Because back to your comment about environmental technology, I do think that's something I'll revisit in my career for sure as an investor, whether I do it for my own, you know, fulfillment purposes on the side, or I eventually do work with a firm that has that as part of their offering. I do think is something that I'll circle back to, because it's just a thing that I desperately want to support in every way that I can, including professionally.
Yeah. You gotta be an adventure builder, Ashley. That's a different subject, but it was
it's a bad addiction.
I know. Or the early stages are tough, are great and tough at the same time. No, and it was the cohort with you that we you know came up with all the early stage venture math that we go over every week, you know, to translate what happens in VC's heads, and now that's it. You just do it all the time. So.
Yeah, but even then you realize, you know, these VCs are not just translating what's in their own head, but they're taking in information and advice from everyone else around them. So a lot of times they're reiterating what they're being told, or, you know, trying to bring it all together in a cohesive way. And so one of the major things that I've learned is things go better when you give them something to react to, especially under unknown circumstances, right? And I think this is true for founders too. Like, you don't know where founders really truly want support right now, because there's so much noise and information coming at them that unless you take a second to actually stop and ask them, you're probably just giving them more stress than you are helping. You know, and it was like this hurry up and wait thing with COVID, because nobody knew what to say and nobody knew what to do. And then everybody went into like risk mitigation, and then everybody had an opinion. So they just flooded the internet with all this advice, and then nobody read it. So, you know, I think that now I'm excited too, because it feels like we're over that initial panic of COVID, and people are becoming clearer about strategizing and supporting and growing, and where we go from here versus the building's on fire, you know?
Great. Well, Ashley Nowicki, VC at Quinoa Capital, based in DC, Impact VC. So thank you very much for joining us today. You can stay on after we go offline. There'll be the private Q&A. But thank you for joining us. For everyone watching on the live stream, this is Rebel One Live. We interview founders and VCs every Tuesday and Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And check us out at rebel1.com. So thank you very much. And thank you, Ashley.